Hey, thanks. Thanks for the invitation to come enjoy the seminar today. And so I'm a community ecologist. I work on coral reefs and the impact of climate change on coral reefs. So I'm intimately involved with the ideas that Andrew has been talking about. And it's very heartening to me, for someone that studies the effects of climate change on an ecosystem, to hear about these technological advances, to think about how we deal with a climate that's obviously changing into the future. And I think it's increasingly clear that trying to influence people's behavior to use less energy is not going to get us to the point we need to get to over the next few decades to think about decreasing CO2 emissions and trying to control our climate at some level. So it's going to take these technological advances to think about carbon capture and alternative forms of energy to achieve those kinds of goals, where we don't push ourselves into basically an irrevocable future of a climate that we definitely do not want. And I'm going to use the title of one of Andrew's slides to pivot to pushing back just a little bit on the theme of the conference. So he had a slide titled, "Nature is Designed to be Forgiving." And I think one of the themes that the popular scientific press really latches onto is the idea that our planet is fragile. And I would actually argue that it's exactly the opposite. So, I study the oceans and changing oceans, where we remove 90% of the sharks and big fishes across the globe, where we increase the amount of nutrients going into the ocean by 100%. We've clear-cut forests, we've drastically reshaped rivers, and then we're surprised that ecosystems collapsed. Right? It's like a doctor amputating someone's leg with a chainsaw and being surprised that that patient then dies. Right? So we're removing the checks and balances from these ecosystems that work to keep them healthy, that protect them from being fragile, that actually make them very robust. And I'll use an extreme example. So most of the people in the room have heard of Bikini Atoll. Right? It was the site of roughly 20 nuclear tests in the 1940s and 50s. Those nuclear bombs essentially evaporated coral reefs that were there. Right? They vaporized. A team of scientists went back there in 2010 to study what had happened in the past 50 years, 60 years since the last detonation. They found some of the highest biomass of sharks and fishes in the world on coral reefs. They found some of the most abundant and highly diverse coral reefs in the world. Right? So you had this really major disturbance that virtually obliterated coral reefs, yet it's far from human influence. There's little fishing, there are no nutrient inputs, and that ecosystem has basically rebuilt itself from the ground up in the past 60 years, right? Because it's away from these human insults that remove the ability of these ecosystems to be robust. So I would argue that our planet isn't inherently fragile. It's actually inherently resilient. But we've been doing things to it to turn it into a fragile planet.
I argue that's true, but we're inherently fragile. There's this great line about, don't worry about the world, especially climate change, worry about yourself. There are natural mechanisms that take care of what happens, including ways we insult the Earth. But the Earth may not look very friendly to us. In the example you did, it looks sound friendly, but it may not look very friendly to us in this new form. It'll be fine from the point of view of geology and whatever's there, and there's still life. It may not be quite the same as your life. I have a good friend who's a professor of chemistry at Caltech, who's pointed out that the best thing you can say about this is, if we continue along the path that we're going along, we really don't know what's going to happen. We know what changes we're making, but we don't really know what the total impact that is going to be on the Earth. So you can't say everything's going to be great. You don't know that. You don't know that everything's going to be absolutely horrible either, but what you do know is you embarked on an experiment, you risked our whole society on that, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. If you're an insurance agent, it's not a good position to be in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so now we can put up the. So this, the image of fragility, it's actually something I talk about in my paper, so if you want to look that up. But I'm really interested in, I'm a literary scholar, these different figurations of the Earth throughout time. So we have, cooperative, competitive, mechanistic, organic, all these sort of dichotomies that are fueled by certain tropes and representations and mediations that impact science, and then science impacts these representations. And so I think that is an important question to ask. When you talk about modeling, you show this line that is fighting against this idea of simple linear causality, and yet you're using a line to represent that. And so I think that this is where sciences and humanities can really work together to think about the impact of these figurations. The little blue dot is this icon of Earth's fragility, this sort of defining moment where we see how small the planet is in space. And I just see that as thinking about these different forms and figurations as a really fruitful meeting place. The humanities are often told that we have to translate the sciences for the people, the lay people, and I sort of resent that. I think that we actually work together and mesh together. But yeah, so these questions of what is inherently resilient, or how are things mediated in such a way that our assumptions about does it operate like a machine? How does that affect our modeling inputs and assumptions? And so I think that even the smallest questions like that are just, I don't know, I see it as a really wonderful meeting point, I guess, for interdisciplinary conversations.
You bring up this point of non-linear areas, which I stayed away from. But it's a key point, right? It's a very complicated model, and you do one thing, and it's not that just that thing would affect something else, and that feeds back to that. And that's where this big uncertainty comes in, because we haven't figured out, you just point out, all these interconnections yet. And so we don't exactly know what
Who was it that said all models are wrong, some models are useful? I forget who it was.
Models are only approximations, and some of them are better approximations than others.
I would love to piggyback off of that statement. I'm a studio art religious studies student here at Westmont College. So when you made the comment about the fact that we see these pictures of smokestack and this often is seen, when you talked about Joel Cooper's work at the lecture you attended, that resonated a lot with me, because something I've noticed since Al Gore's movie You'll Bring No Great Thing is that a lot of the images associated with climate change are usually based in fear-mongering. So this past summer, I was listening to an ACS lecture on teaching science. And something I lamented was the fact that chemists in Hollywood are most well known by the show Breaking Bad. So people take chemistry and popular society, and they're making the movie where it's often making method in their background, which is unfortunate but hilarious. So my question for you and for everyone here would be, how can the artists, and like you were saying, the people in the humanities, work with the scientists to get across these concepts and ideas to the lay people that want to know more, or to the lay people that maybe don't even care? Because just growing up in a place that's very passionate about climate change, having the fear-mongering doesn't always work. The phrase goes, you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And I would like to know if anyone here has thought at all about what the role is someone can play in just depicting it within the world icons, where we recognize stuff in a split second based on little shapes. So,
Well, you just brought up a lot of ideas. I gotta tell you, the first one though is, here's an artist who listened to an American Chemical Society lecture. I'm impressed.
that would be because of my work.
Doesn't matter what. Yeah, so first of all, are there perhaps other artists or literature type people in the audience that have a comment about this?
Anybody something to add about, go ahead.
So I'm also in literature, I work on 18th century poetry, but to piggyback on what you were saying, with the fear mongering, I've noticed in teaching literature and environment, we also, we talk about the fear, but also the urgency in some of the narratives. And to me, even when I was teaching at a secular university, it seems so much like parallel to salvation narratives, or the idea that the urgency of needing to respond to grace, that salvation is nearer at hand than when you first believed, and you need to act now. So it's not just fear, there's always fear with, and if you do your works of mercy and respond in this moment, there's still a chance of salvation. And this came up even in our book discussions, whether from freshman level through graduate level. So I was wondering if others have also talked about this in any discipline, but also the narrative structures, and gained useful traction from those parallels in Christian context.
I have a little bigger question zooming out. I'd be interested to know in a conversation on the liberal arts. It's been a little bit of my sense that maybe 30 or 50 years ago there was a more antagonism between humanities and scientists, and they kind of felt like they were pulling in different directions, but that climate change has in some way unified. I don't know if that resonates with anyone, if anybody has a sense of where philosophers used to just say, well, scientists are all wrong, and now the philosophers say, no, everybody needs to listen to the scientists.
Well, there's a new convergence in religion and physics, for example, that there's more of a sense that people in theology and in physics are trying to answer the same questions, so that there's a wonderful
Like in cosmology, or
called a new convergence that
okay.
talks about how science and religion went apart and then are now coming back together in their ways of thinking.
I'm going back to the point raised here. I'm a rhetorician by training, and I was going to comment on the secretary of the EPA, or director of the EPA, but one of the things that I liked about the artist who drew the lecture, I've seen a bunch of things like that with the Royal Society and they've got some YouTubes and things like that, which I find really helpful when learning something new. And one of the ways that I think it's helpful is that, particularly an opportunity for art, would be to visualize complex ideas that can be represented, mathematically or abstractly. One of which is the timeline involved. Mm-hmm. The timelines are very hard for people who aren't trained in it to get. I think that's really part of why the reaction timelines that you illustrated. If it's urgent, we do it right away. If it's not, we put it off. Mostly because people don't get it as urgent. I got this picture of illustrating carbons by having call it carbon dating, and having carbon molecules of 1897, 1932 floating around in the atmosphere. But something that could help translate the scientific principle into a little bit more of an everyday term in telling a story, because I do think that it needs to get away from just the scary image. It's got to be a story that says there's a process involved, and so you need to understand the process in order to understand what's at stake with it. That's one of the ways that I see it.
Can I follow up and ask, in your area in rhetoric, or if there are other people in rhetoric, is using fear as a motivation? Where does that fit in your discipline? Is that, people don't understand that? Is that? Well,
yeah. That's sort of the standard understanding of rhetoric is you go around tricking and fooling people, and scaring them is a big one for that, or manipulating them with fear. The thing I was going to say was Pruitt's, the quotation from Pruitt we had, the word that stood out to me was precision. Because I think the argument is the models aren't precise. So I was glad to see that you went from there right to the models. One of the things that got me to go back to school in the mid-90s, my doctorate was listening to Rush Limbaugh. And I still remember I don't remember when the show was, but I still remember him talking about the climate change models. This must have been in 93, 94, something like that. He's saying, do you know the way they have those models built? Any number you put in, the climate gets worse. That was proof that the models were rigged to him and to his listeners. So that's to try to counter that rhetorically or persuasively is a tall challenge. I mean, the science education that we're talking about works with some people. Storytelling works with other people who don't have the patience or anything.
See, one of the issues you are fighting against when we talk about this is the example we just heard about Breaking Bad. So actually, the chemistry in Breaking Bad is great, and my colleague actually uses clips from it. So the chemistry is very good, but it's about an evil scientist doing up drugs. So automatically, you have a bunch of evil scientists, right, that you should be skeptical about, that we're doing things that aren't good, and now you overlay a story on that, or you just, on a personal level, you can believe the person who's saying, did you realize we're evil scientists? So that's another layer, and at least in the United States, it's the evil scientists that image is a strong image.
Really enjoyed your lecture. I'm a musicologist by training, but I enjoyed what you said. But my question is, how do you take some of these solutions to scale? Much of what you talked about was pretty much confined to the United States. I spend a lot of time in China, and I've been in Beijing on those days where it was really not healthy to go outside. And so, what level of cooperation is there globally, internationally, to come up with some solutions? Because these issues are not confined to just one particular region of the world.
That's right. They're sort of, we share it all, right? So actually, China is spending more money on developing the science and engineering that needs to be developed for alternative energy in the United States as well. They're outspending this. It's sort of good news. It also suggests we should spend more, but and there is pretty strong cooperation right now between the two countries. So all that's pointing in the right direction. There's a huge amount to do, and it's not just China and the United States. There's other countries in Europe involved also, of course, are the most progressive ones. But I will be unfortunately, I won't be in Beijing because of the Air Club in Shanghai in another month to discuss just this. There's a cooperative laboratory between Singapore, China, and the United States, looking at exactly these issues along with them. And that's just one example. There's a whole bunch of examples of these collaborations. So at the moment, that's moving in the right direction, I think, internationally. That's always been a big issue. China does generate a lot of carbon dioxide because they burn coal. But still, on a per capita basis, we're worse. So without China doing something, you're absolutely right. There isn't a solution. But if China decided to do nothing and we still took care of our quarter of the CO2 that the world is generating, that we're responsible for, that would be a big deal. And as I said, China's going to do something because they're actually putting more effort into it right now than we are. It will take them longer because they have more distance to go.
Hearing the word solution makes me think about the conundrum that there are the people who don't believe in science, and then there are the people who think science are going to solve the problem, that new technologies are going to solve the problems we've created with old technologies, when it's my belief that if we don't change human behavior and reduce our consumption in various lots and lots and lots of ways, then that it has to be a double approach, or triple or quadruple. So you said we have to have more than one way to capture CO2. Well, we also have more than one way to come at this problem And changing behavior is a lot harder, I think. I mean, what you've created with your students is fantastic, and some people might say, well, that's really hard. But I think changing behavior is even harder, and that may be one of the main things that this conversation can focus on, how to change behavior.
A colleague of mine, Rob Soklow, retired physicist, several years ago came out with a series of triangles.
Yeah. Markers on fire.
Yeah.
I hope at least one of them works.
Over the ground. All right, so we have time, years going on here, and we have CO2. And he pointed out that if you just do something simple, like say, we're going to want everybody to generate the same amount of CO2 that they are today, and just take into account the increase in population associated with that, that what you find is you're generating today in 2017 a certain amount of CO2, and over time it goes up, something like that. And he drew this out 2025. Okay, and people have been very critical of this because they think that this curve he drew is not steep enough and it should go like up like that. Okay, but he said, if you take the area under the curve, that's all this area here, under this curve, we've got to get rid of all that CO2 just to get back to where we are today, not to fix the problem. Okay. He said, it's a huge area under there. He said, why don't we take it and let's divide it into a series of triangles. Keep doing that and build up a whole bunch of triangles here. And let's assign each triangle to a known technology. Okay, so the first technology is the one that you've already suggested. Let's change our behavior so that we don't generate as much CO2. Let's turn the lights off when we leave the room. Let's use water more thoughtfully. There's simple things to do. We can do it. Right? That's one triangle. He came up with 9 of these triangles. And he said, if you do all 9 of them, and they were all based on known technology, some of them aren't as simple as just be more conservation-minded, but some of them are, we know how to build more efficient automobile engines, et cetera, et cetera. You can use up this whole space. Okay, you can do it with known technology. You don't have to invent anything new. Then other people came along and said, you should do that. Oh, we obviously should do that. But this curve is the wrong curve, as I said. It's a much steeper curve. And so unless we develop some new technologies, we won't be able to accomplish the goal. So I think you're absolutely right. And of course, the nice thing about what you're saying is, although changing human nature is very difficult, it's something that we can do now. If at the fastest that liquid light can have a process out in the field that just starts nibbling away at CO2, it's another 5 years from now for just a pilot plant. Big deal thing, but tonight you can all go home and turn the lights off in the world. It's a key point, absolutely.
John,
another technical point that ties into the timeline issue of all of this is that a typical coal-fired power plant has a life cycle of 50 to 70 years or something like that. So it's of the same order as the delay in the response of the climate system to what we're doing now. So the real urgency, I feel like, one really low piece of hanging fruit that we could pick is finding alternative technologies to fill the energy needs of today's population, and then putting that on stable grounds for the future growth of the population as well.
Right, because what you're saying is right now, if I'm a government thinking about, I have to supply my citizens with energy 30 years from now, then I have to start planning for that power plant that's going to work in 30 years now. And it takes, in the United States, it takes close to 30 years of all permitting actually to build a power plant. And so do I design a new coal power plant now? If I do that, I'll just be doing the same thing 30 years from now that I'm doing now. There's more of it. Or do I think about some new technology that won't put CO2 in the atmosphere and design that plant now? So the time for the solution is now, even though it's not implemented.
can I ask in this context of all those triangles and of the options that this government might have of what they should do in 30 years, Is there an area that you've come across that you think doesn't get enough attention that causes you to be a little less pessimistic, a little more optimistic?
Well, simply the fact that, in fact, we already have technology that could maybe not solve the problem, but it'll go a long ways. We don't have to develop anything.
Is there a particular technology though?
No, I'm saying that we can, right today, with conservation and improved internal combustion engines, which we know how to build, and all these other things, switching over to power generation that is not fossil fuel based. You do all those things, we already know how to do windmills and all, right? You don't solve the problem, but you make a big step towards solving it. So that helps a lot. The problem with, what I'm telling you about, let's do this, this electrochemistry stuff is, well, hopefully I was convincing to you, but it's never been done. So what if I'm wrong? In the end, it doesn't consume as much CO2 or doesn't work or whatever. We won't know that for 5-6 years, really. So that's a possibility. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's much better off saying I already know how to build a windmill and I can install it right now and start attacking the problem.
Something else, John?
Yeah, I have many thoughts, but one of them, just tacking on what you're saying here, is that I actually feel pretty optimistic about the energy sector. And maybe that's just from living in California and seeing the large-scale deployment of it, but wind power is taking over in my home state in Iowa. The biggest wind power generator of all the states is Texas. And all this offshore wind is happening on the East Coast. And so I think things are actually happening. These triangles are starting to be filled with these present technologies. So it's actually happening. Economics of it are shifting considerably in the right direction. So I think we have things to be optimistic about.
Yeah, you have that. You need more than just wind. That's right.
Yeah, wind and solar is the big one.
Solar is the obvious one, yeah.
Now, the other thing I want to get back to the discussion about the language we use. One thing that frustrates me is that the community that I'm a part of, I'm actually a climate scientist, so the community I'm a part of likes to switch its language, the language that it uses based on, at least there's been one monumental shift away from global warming to climate change. And I would love to go back to global warming because I actually studied paleoclimate. And I think it's really fraught to talk about climate change and especially in the context of fear-mongering, because the only thing that's constant about our Earth's past climate is change. And so we have, we're stuck with the concept of what is the alternative or what's the antithesis of climate change. Is it climate stasis? We're talking about these with lay people. So I think we need to be really careful about the language we use to do that. I would like to go back to global warming, but apparently that was so vilified that to get rid of it. But I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. If you contribute positively to that discussion.
I think when we talk about global warming, people see this like 2-degree temperature change as this like gentle slope where it just gets a little bit warmer. But the heterogeneity in that change around like where is the warming happening in the Arctic mostly at this point, and then how that starts to change over time. There are winners and losers in climate, and then the narrative of what is happening now. Like there's this 50-year timeline, but a lot of my work has been with farmers in Iowa, but also in the Ukraine and other places. The people who are suffering, I think, the most from the volatility in the climate, from that as there's more energy in the system, you get these bigger swings. We, and by we I mean the United States, have been relatively fortunate relative to people in a lot of low-lying areas, growers in Eastern Europe and Western Australia. And so I think, I don't know, like personally I like climate change because when I talk to farmers and say climate change, they can all think back to the last 10 years or 20 years, or I can grow corn in North Dakota now, but I couldn't grow, or my parents or grandparents couldn't because it was too cold. And they kind of see that there are these shifts, and they're not sure what's getting at it, what's causing it. And I think they fall into that group of people who say, that, yeah, things change, change is the only constant, but they know something is happening, and it's just how do you communicate like our role, or the role that they make when they manage their land, and how it feeds into that bigger system. What is the narrative that they can be a part of, as opposed to, well, I vote for the R, and climate change is one of those things that I'm supposed to not be supported. So it gets kind of bundled out of their world and into that national political discourse.
When I think of a basis for optimism, my own mind is confounded by two things: political economy and human nature. On the political economy side, how do you discipline the main polluters on Earth who have a vested interest in delivering short-term profits to shareholders with disregard to social and ecological consequences? How do you intervene in that? We've had the technologies for decades. It's political will that's not available technology. The problem is there, and it has economic roots. The second is, once that political economy starts delivering the goods, people who have rising incomes use that incomes to consume more and to produce more CO2. Fruits and veggies are displaced by industrial meat, fans by air conditioners, bicycles by cars, staying local by long-distance air travel. And the human nature part is we enjoy it. I enjoy it. So how do you intervene at a deep level? How do you bring about the contraction that was mentioned here? And how do you bring about the institutional reforms on political economy when there is so much vested interest, buttressed by military the size of the U.S., to make sure that the status quo is secure for the top 10%?
Well, on that cheery comment, we're about at dinner time. I don't know if you have any final comments to add, and then we can adjourn.
Just one comment is that, one of the big problems, right, is, and I'm not sure it's a penalty issue, but we are unwilling to acknowledge that there is a cost associated with damaging the environment. If we would acknowledge that and charge that cost on the product, then that would solve a lot of the problem right there.
I'd like to say something too. In terms of social change on the scale you're talking about, I'm not a theologian, I'm an English professor, but I do think historically in this country, when it has occurred, primarily through the civil rights movement, it has involved the church in profound ways. And when we talk about the languaging that might be available to us and what would new narratives, new possibilities look like, I think traditional narratives, the Gospels, and the fact that the preponderance of us in here who come out of faith-based institutions, I think have a lot of responsibility for how it is that the church has not made the dent or the impact in the nature of this narrative and in the contribution to social change that it needs to in this country. And how is it that we can mobilize and make use of those narrative resources to reframe the gospel, not to reframe it, but to excavate it in really important ways and begin that process of affecting political, that sort of political impotence we see, or that political gridlock, to go back to the way in which we vote in lockstep with a certain orientation. I think that one of the reasons I love teaching at a faith-based institution and dealing with this subject is I feel like there is so much opportunity and possibility and responsibility. So.
And one more optimistic note. I was thinking about when our campus went over to LEED architecture, and it was kind of dangerous, and it turned out that we saved tons of money. by going there. And there's been a fair amount of that people have discovered that they actually save money by being more ecologically responsible. But the other thing is that your point about the triangles, little changes do make a big difference. And we have to stay focused on that and not move. I mean, one of the dangers is moving from total rejection to despair without anything in between. And that's just irresponsible. We have to do better than that.
All right, well, let's conclude this evening. Let's thank Andrew one more time.